Last week, my daughter-in-law's phone tried to kill me. You might laugh at that, but I'm 78 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm truly scared. Let me explain. Every device in my house is connected to her phone, and no one believes what she's doing to me. My name is Margaret Wilson. I've lived in this house for 45 years. It's where I raised my son David, where I nursed my husband Robert through cancer until he passed, and where I plan to live out my remaining years in peace. That changed when David married Chloe. Don't get me wrong, at first I was happy. David was 42, and I'd worried he might never settle down. Chloe was younger. Maybe too young at 32, but she was beautiful and charming. When they got married 3 years ago, I was genuinely thrilled. I remember standing in the church, watching David's face light up as Chloe walked down the aisle in her elegant white dress. My heart was full that day, seeing my son so happy. The problem started 6 months after the wedding. David had always visited me twice a week. We'd have dinner on Wednesdays, and on Sundays he'd come for lunch and help with any household repairs. Then it became once a week, then once a month. Chloe always had an excuse why they couldn't come more often. "We're just so busy with work, Margaret," she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. I noticed how she never called me Mom or even Mrs. Wilson, always Margaret, like we were distant acquaintances. I tried not to take it personally. Young couples need their space after all. But I missed my son. Phone calls became shorter, text messages less frequent. It was as if a wall was slowly being built between us, brick by invisible brick. Then came what I now recognize as phase 1 of her plan. David showed up with Chloe one Sunday afternoon in March, carrying shopping bags. It was the first time they'd visited in 3 weeks. "Mom, we got you some presents," he announced, beaming like a schoolboy. From the bags emerged a collection of sleek devices: a smart speaker, a video doorbell, a thermostat with a glowing blue display, and something called a smart stove. Chloe explained that they were worried about me living alone at my age. "These will help keep you safe," she said, "and we can check on you remotely." I didn't like it, but David looked so pleased that I agreed. That was my first mistake. I remember how Chloe's fingers moved expertly across her phone screen, setting everything up, connecting it all to what she called the cloud. I didn't understand most of what she was doing, but I nodded and smiled. David seemed so proud of her technical knowledge. "Mom, this is amazing," he said. "Now if you fall or need help, we'll know right away. The doorbell will show us who's at your door. The thermostat will keep the house at the perfect temperature automatically." Within a week, my house wasn't mine anymore. My TV would turn on by itself, usually to channels I never watched. The thermostat would drop to freezing at night, then Chloe would fix it remotely and act like I'd changed it myself. The smart speaker would suddenly announce I didn't understand that command when I hadn't said a word. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I forgetting things? Was I talking to myself without realizing it? I began keeping a journal, writing down when these strange occurrences happened. But even as I did this, I doubted myself. At my age, memory lapses aren't uncommon. Maybe I had adjusted the thermostat and forgotten. Then, last Tuesday night, I woke up gasping. The house was filled with smoke, and I could hear the fire alarm blaring. I stumbled to the kitchen to find my stove on full heat. A dish towel I'd left nearby was now smoldering. I hadn't used the stove since lunch. I never left dish towels near the burners. Robert had been a firefighter, and safety habits were deeply ingrained in me. As I threw water on the cloth and opened the windows, my phone rang. It was Chloe. "Margaret, the fire alarm app alerted us. Is everything okay?" Her voice was concerned, but there was something else there. Maybe disappointment? I couldn't quite place it. The stove turned on by itself, I said, still coughing from the smoke. Oh, Margaret, she sighed, that patronizing tone creeping in. You must have forgotten to turn it off after dinner. I didn't use the stove for dinner, I insisted. I had a sandwich. There was a pause. Well, these things happen as we get older. Maybe we should talk about getting you some help around the house. That's when I realized my life might depend on figuring out exactly what game my daughter-in-law is playing and how to beat her at it. The next morning, David called. Mom, Chloe says you left the stove on again. We need to talk about whether you should still be living alone. That conversation with David was the wake-up call I needed. As I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. Living alone was code for assisted living facility, code for taking my house. You see, my house sits on what's now prime real estate in our rapidly growing town. What was once a quiet street is now surrounded by upscale shopping centers and trendy restaurants. David had mentioned casually a few months ago that a developer had offered to buy the entire block for an absolute fortune. I'd said no, of course. This is my home. The floorboards in the living room still creak in the exact spots where Robert used to pace while thinking. The kitchen doorframe still has pencil marks showing David's height as he grew. The backyard maple tree still has the swing where I used to push him on summer evenings. How could I leave all that behind? But now I understood Chloe's game. If I was deemed incompetent to live alone, who would make decisions about my property? My only child and his wife. That day, I made a plan. First, I needed to understand what I was up against. I'd never been technologically savvy. My cell phone was 10 years old and I still wrote checks for my bills. But I'd been a high school English teacher for 40 years. I knew how to research. I walked to the public library, not trusting any device in my home. It was a beautiful spring day, cherry blossoms lining the sidewalks, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing with questions. Could Chloe really control my stove remotely? Was she listening to me through that smart speaker? Was I just being paranoid? Mrs. Patel, the librarian who'd been my colleague before we both retired, helped me get set up on a computer. Her dark eyes narrowed with concern when she saw my distracted expression. "What are you researching today, Margaret?" she asked. "Smart home systems and how they can be controlled." She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. That's what I've always appreciated about Sheila Patel. She respects people's privacy. 3 hours later, I had learned some terrifying things. Every device in my home was connected to something called the cloud. Chloe, as the administrator, could control all of them remotely. She could turn my stove on and off. She could change my thermostat. She could even listen to me through the smart speaker and watch me through the doorbell camera. My home had become a surveillance prison, with Chloe as the warden. I read forum posts from other elderly people who had experienced similar issues. Smart home devices being used to monitor, control, and sometimes torment them. Most were dismissed as confused or paranoid. Some ended up in assisted living facilities after accidents with these devices made them appear incapable of caring for themselves. I checked out books on smart home technology and home networks. If I was going to fight back, I needed to understand the weapons being used against me. Mrs. Patel helped me find the most accessible titles, ones written for complete beginners. "Margaret," she said as I was leaving, "is everything all right? You seem troubled." I hesitated. Should I tell her my suspicions? Would she think I was losing my mind? "Just trying to keep up with the times," I said finally. "David installed some new gadgets in my house." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "Well, if you need any help understanding that material, I'm here Tuesday through Saturday." When I returned home, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small camera in the corner of my living room, disguised as a smoke detector. It wasn't there when Robert was alive. I'd know because he was fanatical about home safety equipment. This was new, installed during Chloe's smart home upgrade. I stared directly at it and smiled, feeling a strange thrill. I wanted Chloe to know that I knew. Then I carefully arranged my library books on the coffee table, spines visible, titles like Understanding Smart Home Security and Digital Privacy in the Modern Age clearly displayed. Let her see that. Let her wonder if the helpless old lady wasn't so helpless after all. That night, I slept on the couch with a fire extinguisher beside me and unplugged every device I could find. I turned off the circuit breaker to my kitchen just to be safe. Better to be cold than to burn in my sleep. In the morning, there were 3 missed calls from Chloe and a text from David. "Mom, Chloe's worried. She can't reach you through the house system. Please call us back." I ignored them. Instead, I walked to a payphone at the gas station down the street, something I hadn't done since the 1990s, and called my old friend Eleanor, who had been a detective before retiring. Elle and I had met when she investigated a theft at my school 20 years ago. We'd stayed friends through her divorce, my husband's illness, and the lonely years that followed for both of us. She was the sharpest person I knew and the most trustworthy. "Elle," I said when she answered, "I need your help. I think my daughter-in-law is trying to kill me with her iPhone."
Eleanor was skeptical at first. Who wouldn't be? But she was also the most loyal friend I'd ever had. After 15 minutes of my increasingly frantic explanation, she agreed to come over. "Don't tell anyone I'm visiting," I warned, "and please leave your cell phone at home." "Margaret, are you sure this isn't—" "Just humor an old woman, Elle," I interrupted. "If I'm wrong, you can take me to get my head examined yourself." Eleanor arrived an hour later, her gray hair tucked under a sun hat, looking every bit the retired detective she was. At 70, she was younger than me, but carried herself with the alertness of someone who had spent decades observing human behavior at its worst. She wore a light jacket despite the warm day, and I suspected she had her old service weapon tucked inside. Eleanor had never fully left her police days behind. I led her through the house, pointing out each device: the smart speaker on the kitchen counter, the video doorbell, the thermostat, the smart stove, the hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each new detail. "What convinced you this wasn't just technical glitches?" she finally asked, her voice low as if she too was worried about being overheard. I showed her the burn mark on the counter from the dish towel. "The stove turned on by itself at 2 a.m., I said, "and the smoke detector, which Chloe monitors from her phone, didn't go off until the smoke was thick enough to wake me up." Eleanor walked around my kitchen, examining the smart stove with the practiced eye of someone who had investigated arson cases. She ran her finger along the control panel, studied the power connection. "These things do malfunction sometimes, Maggie," she said, but her tone suggested she wasn't dismissing my concerns. "Then explain why the doorbell camera records constantly, but had a technical issue the night someone tried to break in 3 weeks ago. Or why my thermostat drops to 58 degrees only on nights when my arthritis is acting up. Or why the smart speaker randomly orders things I never ask for, always using my credit card." I showed Eleanor my journal where I documented each incident with dates, times, and details. Her eyebrows raised as she flipped through the pages. Eleanor's investigative instincts were clearly engaged now. She pulled out a notebook of her own, the small black one she'd carried throughout her career. "We need to document everything. Times, dates, incidents. We need patterns." She looked up at the disguised camera in the corner. "And we need to be careful where we talk." She gestured for me to follow her outside. We walked to the backyard, well away from any devices, and sat on the old wooden bench under the maple tree. "Tell me about David and Chloe," she said. "How did they meet? What was your impression of her from the beginning?" I thought back to when David first introduced Chloe. They met at his company holiday party. She was in marketing, he's in accounting. She's beautiful, charming when she wants to be, but there was always something calculated about her, like she was playing a role. "Did David date much before her?" she asked. "Not seriously, not for years. He was married briefly in his 20s. That's where Tyler, my grandson, came from. After the divorce, he focused on his career. I think he was lonely." Eleanor nodded, making notes. "And Chloe's background?" "She's from California originally, moved here about 5 years ago. She talks about growing up wealthy, but I've never met any family. No parents at the wedding, no siblings. Said they couldn't travel due to health issues." "Convenient," Eleanor murmured. "What about finances? Yours and theirs?" I explained about my house's increasing value, about the developer's offer, about how David had mentioned casually that he and Chloe were looking at vacation properties they couldn't quite afford. We spent the afternoon creating a detailed log of strange occurrences. When seen together on paper, the pattern was undeniable. Eleanor let out a low whistle. "This is methodical," she said. "If I were still on the force, I'd call this harassment at minimum, attempted negligent homicide at worst." "What should I do?" I asked. "David thinks I'm just confused. The few times I've tried to explain, Chloe jumps in with some technical explanation that makes me sound like I don't know what I'm talking about." Eleanor thought for a moment, tapping her pen against her notebook. "We need evidence they can't dismiss. And we need to find out why they're doing this now. Has anything changed recently?" I shook my head, then stopped. "Well, David mentioned that he and Chloe are trying to get approved for a mortgage on a vacation home, but they're having trouble with the financing." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And your house is now worth—" "The developer offered $1.2 million for it last year." "There's your motive," Eleanor said grimly. "Now we just need to prove it." She jotted down a list of items she would bring over tomorrow: a non-networked camera system, a device to detect electronic surveillance, some basic tools to examine the smart home equipment. "In the meantime, stay vigilant," she advised. "Keep that fire extinguisher handy, and maybe sleep in a different room than usual, just to be safe." As Eleanor was leaving, my smart speaker suddenly announced, "I've added elder care facilities to your shopping list, Margaret." Neither one of us had said a word. We looked at each other, and I saw in Eleanor's eyes the same cold fear that was spreading through my chest. This wasn't in my head. This was real. "Tomorrow, we fight back," Eleanor whispered. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in a chair in my bedroom, away from any devices, watching the door. Outside, the wind rustled through the maple leaves, a sound that had once brought me comfort. Now every noise made me jump. I thought about Robert, about what he would do in this situation. He had been a man of action, brave to a fault. "Trouble don't improve with age, Maggie," he used to say. "Better to face it head on." By dawn, my fear had hardened into resolve. I might be old, but I wasn't helpless, and I certainly wasn't going to be chased out of my own home by my daughter-in-law's digital haunting.
The next morning, I awoke to a text from David. "Coming by with Chloe for lunch. We need to talk about some options for your care." My hands trembled as I read it. They were accelerating their timeline. I called Eleanor immediately from the gas station payphone. "They're coming at noon," I told her. "They want to talk about options for my care." "Stay calm," Eleanor said. "I've been thinking. We need to gather evidence without letting them know we're on to them. I have an idea. Eleanor arrived an hour later with shopping bags, much like the ones David and Chloe had brought months ago, but with very different contents. She had driven her old Toyota, parking it a block away to avoid being spotted. "Sorry I'm late," she said as I let her in. "Had to make some stops." Inside the bags were several small devices, none of which needed to be plugged in or connected to the internet. "Nanny cams," she explained, pulling out what looked like ordinary household objects: a clock radio, a tissue box, a picture frame. Each one has a hidden camera with its own memory card. No cloud, no Wi-Fi, just old-fashioned recordings that they can't access. We placed them strategically around the house, focusing on the kitchen and the areas with Chloe's smart devices. Eleanor showed me how to check the footage later, how to replace the memory cards when full. "Now," she said, "when they come today, don't confront them. Act confused but cooperative. We need to see their next move." She also gave me a small device that looked like a key fob. "Panic button," she explained. "Press it if you feel threatened. It's linked to my phone. I'll be nearby, watching." Elena left just before 11, promising to park where she could observe the house. I spent the next hour rehearsing how I would act, slightly forgetful, increasingly dependent, reluctantly open to their suggestions. It was harder than I expected. I'd spent my life being competent and self-reliant. Playing vulnerable went against every instinct. But as Robert used to say, sometimes you have to bend to avoid breaking. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. David and Chloe stood on my porch, both wearing expressions of concerned determination. Chloe was clutching her ever-present phone, its gleaming case matching her manicured nails. David looked tired, with new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a few months ago. "Mom," David said as they entered, "we're worried about you." I invited them in, offering coffee and cookies that I'd baked that morning. My mother always said never to have difficult conversations on an empty stomach. "The stove incident has us concerned," David continued as we sat at the kitchen table. The burn mark was still visible on the counter, a stark reminder of what had nearly happened. "I've been tracking some concerning patterns," Chloe added, her voice gentle but firm. She was good, I had to admit. If I hadn't been certain of what she was doing, I might have been convinced by her performance of caring daughter-in-law. "I don't take any medications," I interjected, unable to help myself. Chloe smiled patiently. "The doctor prescribed calcium supplements last month. Remember? The smart speaker was programmed to remind you." I never went to the doctor last month. I'd never been prescribed calcium supplements. But before I could say this, David took my hand. "Mom, we think it might be time to consider a place where you can get proper care, where professionals can help you." I feigned uncertainty, looking down at our joined hands. His fingers were so much like Robert's, strong, square-tipped, capable. But Robert would never have suggested sending me away. "And what would happen to the house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well," she said quickly, "we'd probably sell it. The market's hot right now, and that money could pay for a really nice facility." "I see," I said, feeling cold despite the summer heat. "Have you found a place already?" They exchanged a glance that confirmed they had. "There's a beautiful community just 30 minutes from us. We could visit all the time." I thought about the missed visits over the past year, the broken promises, the slow isolation that had been engineered around me. The thought of being even more at their mercy sent a chill through me. "I'd like to think about it," I said, feigning uncertainty. "It's a big decision." "Of course," David said, looking relieved. "Take the weekend. We can talk again Monday." As they prepared to leave, Chloe excused herself to use the bathroom. David used the opportunity to speak to me alone. "Mom, I know this is hard, but Chloe's really worried about you. She checks your smart home app constantly, making sure you're okay." "I'm sure she does," I thought bitterly, but I just nodded. "We only want what's best for you," he added, and I could see he truly believed it. My son, always eager to see the best in people, especially those he loved. It was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. After they left, I rushed to check the cameras. The footage showed something chilling. While David had been distracting me in the living room, Chloe had slipped into the kitchen. She'd taken something from her purse and sprinkled it into my tea canister. Then she'd adjusted settings on my smart stove through her phone. I called Eleanor immediately. "You need to see this, and we need to move faster." She arrived within minutes, reviewing the footage with growing alarm. "We need to get that tea tested," she said, "and we need to contact Tyler. If anyone can help us understand how she's manipulating these devices, it's him." That night, I lay awake thinking about how quickly someone's life could be dismantled, not by dramatic confrontations, but by small, steady erosions of autonomy, by technology that was supposed to help but could so easily be weaponized, by a predator who had correctly identified the perfect prey, an elderly woman whom no one would believe. The next morning, I carefully avoided making tea. Instead, I sealed the canister in a plastic bag and labeled it as evidence. Eleanor had taught me that much from her detective days. "Always preserve the chain of custody," she'd told me. "Treat everything like it's going to court, because it might." I needed to understand what else Chloe might be planning. Eleanor and I had set up our surveillance, but I realized we needed to go deeper. If Chloe could spy on me, perhaps I could spy on her. I called my grandson, Tyler. At 19, he was David's son from a brief early marriage. Tyler lived with his mother across town and had always been my ally. Unlike many teenagers, he actually enjoyed spending time with his grandmother. He'd come over for my homemade lasagna and stay to hear stories about when his father was young. More importantly, he was a computer science major at the state university with a particular interest in cybersecurity. "Grandma," he answered cheerfully, "what's up?" "Tyler, I need your help, but you can't tell your father or Chloe." There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said simply, "and I need someone who understands technology." 20 minutes later, I had explained everything. Unlike his father, Tyler didn't question my sanity. Instead, he asked sharp, technical questions about the devices. When I mentioned the stove activating itself, his voice hardened. "That's not just invasive, that's dangerous," he said. "Who installed these systems?" "Chloe set everything up on her phone. David helped install the physical devices." "This is seriously messed up," he said finally. "Chloe's always talking about how she's streamlined your house. I had no idea she was using it against you." I felt a wave of relief. Someone else believed me. Someone who understood the technology involved. "Can you help me?" I asked. "Definitely. First, we need to see what she's doing on her phone. I can create a shadow account that mirrors her smart home app. You'll be able to see everything she's controlling." Tyler came over that afternoon, careful to park a block away as I'd requested. He was tall like his father, with the same warm brown eyes, but more intense, more cautious. He carried a backpack full of equipment, a laptop, various cables, small devices I couldn't identify. I didn't tell Dad or Lisa, referring to his mother, just that I was working on a project with friends. He worked quickly, using his laptop to bypass security measures I didn't understand. He examined each smart device, occasionally muttering to himself about default passwords and security vulnerabilities. "I need her password," he said, frowning at the screen. I thought for a moment. Try Chloe David 2020. That was their wedding hashtag. She uses it for everything. Tyler typed it in. "We're in," he said, sounding impressed. Chloe's not exactly a security expert. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Tyler pulled up a dashboard showing every device in my home. There was a complete log of commands: thermostat adjustments at 2 a.m.,
Stove activations in the middle of the night, door locks engaging when I was outside gardening. "She's got your smart speaker recording everything," Tyler said, his voice tight with anger, "and sending the transcripts to her email." I felt violated in a way I hadn't anticipated. Every conversation, every private moment recorded and analyzed. Had she heard me talking to Eleanor? Did she know we were on to her? "Can you stop it?" I asked. "Better than that," Tyler said with a grim smile that reminded me of Robert. "I can set up alerts that will tell you whenever she's accessing any device. And I can install a kill switch that will let you override her commands." As Tyler worked, I felt a wave of gratitude mixed with sadness. My own son didn't believe me, but my grandson did without question. The generational irony wasn't lost on me. "Why would she do this?" Tyler asked as he typed. "I mean, I know she's always been kind of fake, but this is criminal." I explained about the house value and their financial troubles. "That tracks," Tyler said. "They're really overextended. Chloe keeps pushing for a bigger lifestyle than they can afford. New car, expensive vacations, designer everything." "Has she always been this way?" I asked, realizing how little I knew about my daughter-in-law despite 3 years of family dinners and holidays. "As long as I've known her," Tyler confirmed. "She was nice to me at first, probably trying to get Dad's approval. But once they were married, she started suggesting I shouldn't visit so often, said they needed couple time." That explained Tyler's increasingly rare appearances at family gatherings, another person Chloe had systematically isolated from David. By evening, Tyler had transformed my relationship with my smart home. I now had an app on an old tablet that showed me everything Chloe was doing in real time. I could see when she accessed the cameras, when she adjusted the thermostat, when she activated or deactivated devices. "Be careful," Tyler warned as he left. "Just because we can see her moves doesn't mean she's not dangerous. I've recorded evidence of everything she's done so far, but we need to catch her in the act to convince Dad." That night, the tablet buzzed with an alert. Kitchen stove burner 3 activated. I watched in real time as the burner temperature was remotely set to high. This time, I was ready. I pressed the kill switch Tyler had installed, and the stove immediately turned off. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Smart stove reporting an error? Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Making tea, but changed my mind," I texted back. I smiled as I imagined her frustration. The hunter was becoming the hunted. Later that night, another alert. The thermostat being lowered to 60 degrees. Again, I used the override. This continued for hours, like a digital game of cat and mouse. Chloe trying to manipulate my environment, me countering each move. Around midnight, the tablet showed the smart speaker activating its listening mode. I imagined Chloe on the other end, straining to hear if I was in distress from the cold or perhaps from another accident. I leaned close to the speaker and whispered, "Nice try, Chloe." The listening indicator immediately shut off. She knew I was on to her. The game was changing.
The weekend passed with a strange new rhythm. Each time Chloe attempted to manipulate my environment, I countered her moves. When she locked the back door remotely while I was in the garden, I used Tyler's override. When she cranked the air conditioning to 60 degrees during a cool night, I returned it to normal with a tap on my tablet. Tyler had also installed simple, non-connected carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, ones that Chloe couldn't control. I slept better knowing these basic safety measures were in place. Eleanor came by on Saturday with news. Her friend at the university lab had analyzed the substance from my tea canister. "It's a sedative," she reported grimly. "Not immediately lethal, but it would make you extremely disoriented, combined with the late-night stove activations." The implication was clear. make me appear increasingly confused, perhaps cause an accident that could be blamed on my deteriorating mental state. We have enough to go to the police, Eleanor suggested. Not yet, I said. It's all circumstantial. We need something more definitive. On Sunday evening, my tablet alerted me to activity on my smart speaker. Chloe was listening in. Rather than disabling it, I decided to use it to my advantage. I should call the lawyer tomorrow. I've been thinking about changing my will. With David and Chloe so busy, perhaps I should leave the house to Tyler instead. The listening indicator on the speaker stayed active for a full minute after I stopped talking. I smiled to myself. Let her chew on that. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of text messages from Chloe. Just checking in on you. David and I were wondering if you've thought more about that care facility. We could come by tonight to discuss options. I responded non-committally, buying time. Eleanor and I had agreed to meet at the library to review our evidence and plan our next steps. I needed to be careful. My phone was probably being tracked. I left it at home and walked to my neighbor's house to ask for a ride to the library. Mrs. Chin had been my neighbor for 30 years and was delighted to help, no questions asked. "You look worried, Margaret," she said as we drove. "Everything okay?" I considered confiding in her, but decided against it. The fewer people who knew, the better. "Just some family matters to sort out," I said vaguely. At the library, Eleanor was waiting with a USB drive and a grim expression. She led me to a quiet corner where we could talk privately. "I had the substance in your tea tested by a friend who works at the university lab," she said without preamble. "It's not immediately lethal, but it's a powerful sedative that would make you extremely disoriented and sleepy, combined with the late-night stove activations." She didn't need to finish the thought. The plan was becoming clear. Make me appear increasingly confused and forgetful, then arrange an accident that would remove me permanently. "We have enough to go to the police," Eleanor said again. I shook my head. "It's circumstantial. And Chloe is charming. She'd convince them I'm just a confused old woman. We need to catch her in the act with witnesses who can't be dismissed." We spent the next hour formulating a plan. It was risky, but it might be my only chance to maintain my independence and possibly save my life. We would let Chloe believe her plan was working. I would act increasingly disoriented, especially around David. I would accidentally mention changing my will to favor Tyler, which would accelerate Chloe's timeline. Meanwhile, Tyler, Eleanor, and I would set up a more comprehensive surveillance system documenting everything. Most importantly, we would create a situation where Chloe would be forced to reveal her true intentions in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked. "It's dangerous to play her game." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I'm tired of being afraid in my own home." As Mrs. Chin drove me home, I noticed David's car in my driveway. My heart sank. They were early. Inside, David and Chloe were waiting in my living room. Chloe's face was tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom," David said, standing as I entered, "we need to talk. Chloe saw some concerning activity with your smart home system, and you mentioned changing your will?" I took a deep breath. The confrontation I had been planning for had arrived sooner than expected. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm glad you're both here. I've been wanting to discuss some concerning patterns I've noticed." Chloe's phone was in her hand, as always. I wondered if she was already adjusting some device in my home, preparing to demonstrate my confusion to David. "What patterns, Mom?" David asked, his tone patronizing. I met his eyes directly. "The pattern of your wife using technology to gaslight me, isolate me, and potentially harm me, all to get her hands on this house." The room fell silent. David looked shocked. Chloe's expression flickered between surprise and calculation. That's absurd. David, this is exactly what I've been worried about. These paranoid delusions. They're not delusions if I have proof, I said quietly. David looked between us, clearly torn. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the natural instinct to believe his mother fighting against what must have been months of Chloe's subtle programming. Mom, David said gently, I know you're upset about the assisted living discussion, but these accusations are serious. Yes, they are, which is why I've documented everything. I reached for my tablet, but Chloe was faster. David, we need to call Dr. Reynolds. Remember what he said about paranoid episodes? How they can seem completely real to the person experiencing them? This was the first I had heard of any Dr. Reynolds, another fabrication. I haven't seen any Dr. Reynolds, I said firmly. See, Chloe said to David, the memory issues are getting worse. I could see the situation slipping away from me. I hadn't expected them to arrive before Eleanor returned. Our carefully constructed plan was falling apart. Call Tyler, I suggested, grasping for the one ally who might be able to reach David. He helped me set up some independent security measures last week. Chloe's face drained of color. Tyler, what does he have to do with this? David looked confused. My son, Tyler? What are you talking about, Mom? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Eleanor standing on the porch with Tyler beside her. Relief flooded through me. My backup had arrived. That will be them now, I said, moving toward the door. David, stop her, Chloe hissed. This is getting out of hand. But David, perhaps sensing something wasn't right, let me pass. I opened the door and felt a surge of relief as Tyler and Eleanor entered. Hey, Dad, Tyler said, his voice carefully neutral. Chloe, Grandma asked me to come by. For what exactly? Chloe asked. I could see her mind racing, calculating how much Tyler might know, how this changed her plans. Tyler pulled out his laptop and turned it so everyone could see. Here's the access log showing commands sent from your phone, Chloe, and here's the audio file of you telling Dad that Grandma adjusted the thermostat herself when the logs clearly show you did it remotely. David stared at the screen, then at his wife. Chloe, what is this? It's obviously been manipulated. Tyler's good with computers. He could have faked all of this. What about this? Eleanor stepped forward and held up the sealed tea canister. My friend at the university lab found a sedative in Margaret's tea, a sedative that doesn't show up in routine toxicology, but would make an elderly woman appear confused and disoriented, or might make it impossible for her to react to, say, a kitchen fire in the middle of the night. David's face had gone pale. Chloe, tell me this isn't true. Chloe looked cornered, her eyes darting between us like a trapped animal. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then her composure cracked completely. You don't understand the pressure we're under, the debt. This house is worth over $1 million, and she just sits here alone, wasting space, while we're drowning in mortgage payments and credit card debt. The room fell silent. Chloe seemed to realize what she'd admitted and backpedaled quickly. I mean, that's not... I was just trying to help keep her safe with the smart home system. If there were glitches, it wasn't intentional. But the damage was done. David's face had gone pale as he stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. You were going to hurt my mother for money? He whispered. Tyler moved to stand beside me, his arm protectively around my shoulder. I've downloaded all the evidence and sent copies to myself, Eleanor, and Grandma's lawyer, he said firmly. So don't get any ideas about deleting the logs, Chloe. David stood frozen, looking between his wife and his family. I could see him processing the unthinkable, that he had nearly been complicit in harming his own mother. David, I said gently, I think you and Chloe should leave now. We all have a lot to think about. Chloe grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with panic. This isn't over, she muttered as she headed for the door. David hesitated, then approached me. Mom, I don't know what to say. I should have listened to you. We'll talk tomorrow. I'm not going anywhere. As they left, I watched through the window as they got into separate cars. David sat in his for a long moment before starting the engine. Chloe sped away without looking back. When they were gone, Tyler, Eleanor, and I collapsed on the couch. That wasn't exactly how we planned it, but it worked, Eleanor said. Do you think David believes us? I asked Tyler. He has to. The evidence is irrefutable, and Chloe basically confessed. I nodded, but worry still gnawed at me. Chloe was cornered now, and cornered predators are the most dangerous. She won't give up easily, not with so much money at stake. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Then we'll be ready for her next move. The next 48 hours were a blur of police reports, legal consultations, and long, painful conversations with David. He moved out of his house the same day, unable to look at Chloe after what he learned. He stayed at a hotel, calling me several times to apologize through tears. I should have believed you, he kept saying. I should have seen what was happening. You saw what she wanted you to see, I told him. She manipulated both of us. The truth was, I was still processing my own emotions. Relief that I was no longer in danger, warred with anger that my own son had doubted me. But beneath it all was a profound sadness for David, whose life had been shattered overnight. On Wednesday morning, I met with a lawyer Eleanor recommended, Patricia Gonzalez, a specialist in elder law who had previously worked as a prosecutor. What Chloe did constitutes elder abuse, Patricia explained in her downtown office. Financial exploitation, psychological abuse, and potentially attempted homicide were building a case. The police took our evidence seriously, especially after the lab results confirmed the substance in my tea. Detective Rivera, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, sat in my living room taking detailed notes. Financial elder abuse is common, she explained, but this level of technological manipulation is something we're seeing more often as smart homes become popular. Your case might help us build better protections for other vulnerable adults. I bristled slightly at being called vulnerable, but I understood her point. Without Tyler's technical knowledge and Eleanor's investigative experience, I might have ended up another tragic headline. Elderly woman dies in house fire, memory issues suspected. Chloe was brought in for questioning but released pending further investigation. She hired an expensive lawyer who was already spinning the narrative. She had been trying to help her confused mother-in-law, and any technical issues with the smart home were unfortunate glitches that had been misinterpreted. Will she go to jail? I asked Detective Rivera. Hard to say, she admitted. The digital evidence is strong, but these cases can be difficult to prosecute. The attempted poisoning is our strongest charge, but her lawyer will claim you contaminated the evidence. She gave me a sympathetic look. Prepare yourself for a fight. I was ready for one. After decades of teaching high school English, I knew something about standing my ground. On Wednesday evening, Tyler came over with pizza and a stack of electronics. I'm upgrading your security system, he announced, but this time you'll be the only one with access. As he worked, installing cameras that recorded locally instead of to the cloud and replacing the smart devices with simpler alternatives, I watched him with immense pride. He had believed me without question and jumped to my defense when even his father had doubted me. You know, Tyler said as he programmed a simple panic button that would call him and emergency services simultaneously, you should consider teaching a class at the senior center about technology safety. I bet a lot of older people have no idea how these systems to be misused. I considered this. That's not a bad idea. Turn my experience into something useful. Exactly. Don't let your smart home outsmart you.
A survival guide for seniors in the digital age. We both laughed, but there was truth in the suggestion. My ordeal had shown me a darker side of technology that many of my peers might never suspect until it was too late. Later that night, David called again. He sounded exhausted. "The bank called today," he said. "Apparently, we're much further in debt than I realized. Chloe had taken out several credit cards in my name." He paused. "She's been planning this for a long time, Mom. The financial advisor thinks she was counting on inheriting your house to solve our debt problems." "What will you do now?" I asked. "File for divorce. Bankruptcy, probably. Start over." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet living room, now free of listening devices and surveillance cameras, and contemplated how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, I had been fighting for my autonomy, possibly my life. Now I was safe, but my family was fractured. Yet, something unexpected had emerged from this ordeal. A closer relationship with Tyler, a renewed friendship with Eleanor, and the discovery that at 78, I was still capable of fighting back when cornered. I wasn't just a vulnerable old woman after all. I found myself thinking of my students over the years, how I'd always encouraged them to find strength in adversity, to see challenges as opportunities for growth. It seemed I was now learning that lesson myself, late in life. As I headed to bed, my new simple design phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, Margaret." Chloe. I should have been frightened, but instead I felt strangely calm. I took a screenshot of the message and forwarded it to the police, Tyler, and Eleanor. Then I blocked the number. This time, I wasn't facing the threat alone. The next morning, I met with my bank to review my accounts and change all access permissions. The manager, a former student of mine, was horrified by my story and set up additional security measures. "No one will be able to access your accounts without in-person verification," he assured me. I also visited my doctor for a complete checkup, establishing a clear record of my mental and physical health. Dr. Patel, who had been my physician for 20 years, was outraged by what Chloe had tried to do. "I'll document your cognitive function formally," she said. "If anyone questions your capacity in the future, you'll have medical records to refute them." These practical steps helped me regain a sense of control, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe wasn't finished. Her text had been a promise, not just a threat. She had invested too much in her plan to walk away easily. That evening, as I was making dinner, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello, Margaret." Chloe's voice was eerily calm. "I just wanted to check how you're doing." "I'm doing fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And I've forwarded your text to the police." "Always one step ahead, aren't you? For a woman your age, you're surprisingly resilient." "What do you want, Chloe?" "Just to let you know that your son is suffering because of your accusations. His reputation, his credit, his future, all ruined. Was it worth it?" The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. "Your son is suffering because of your actions, not mine," I replied. "Don't contact me again." I hung up and immediately called Detective Rivera to report the call. She asked me to come to the station the next day to make a formal statement. She explained, "We're building a pattern of harassment. Keep documenting everything." That night, I dreamed of Robert. We were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset as we had done so many evenings during our marriage. "You did good, Maggie," he said in the dream. "You were always the stronger one." I woke with tears on my face, but a newfound resolve in my heart. I would not be intimidated, not by Chloe, not by anyone.
A month passed. The criminal investigation against Chloe moved slowly through the system, with her lawyer throwing up procedural roadblocks at every turn. The divorce proceedings were equally contentious, with Chloe claiming half of everything, including potential future inheritance from me. David had moved into a small apartment and was rebuilding his life, piece by painful piece. He visited me twice a week now, real visits, not the perfunctory check-ins of the past few years. We were healing our relationship, though the trust would take longer to fully restore. "I keep looking back at all the signs I missed," he confessed during one visit. "How she isolated me from friends, from Tyler, from you. Classic abuser tactics, and I never saw it." "Abusers are skilled at hiding their true nature," I reminded him, "even from those closest to them." Tyler had suggested I follow through on the idea of teaching technology safety classes, and to my surprise, I found I enjoyed it. Every Tuesday afternoon, I met with a group of seniors at the community center, explaining the potential dangers of smart devices and demonstrating simple security measures. The technology isn't inherently bad, but it needs to serve you, not control you, I would tell them. My story had resonated with many of my peers, who shared their own experiences of feeling intimidated or manipulated by younger family members through technology they didn't fully understand. I was no expert, but I was learning alongside them, with Tyler occasionally joining as a technical consultant. Life was finding a new normal, until the threatening notes began appearing. The first one was tucked under my windshield wiper after one of my classes. Simple white paper, computer-printed text, "You'll regret what you've done." I reported it to Detective Rivera, who promised to increase patrols in my neighborhood, but admitted there wasn't much they could do with such a vague threat. "Keep it as evidence," she advised, "and stay vigilant." The second note appeared 3 days later, slipped under my front door. Smart homes aren't the only things that can malfunction. I was rattled but determined not to show it. I continued my routine, refusing to be confined by fear, but I did accept David's offer to install a more comprehensive security system, one that Tyler had personally vetted for safety. After the third note, "Old people have accidents all the time." Eleanor insisted on staying with me for a few days. We set up additional security cameras outside the house and made sure all the doors and windows were secure. "She's escalating," Eleanor observed grimly as we reviewed the latest note. "The criminal case is building against her, the divorce is going to leave her with nothing but debt, and she blames you for all of it." "What should we do?" I asked. "Set a trap," Eleanor said simply. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would let it be known that I was updating my will, removing David as my primary beneficiary due to concerns about Chloe's influence over him. Instead, I would be leaving everything to a feline rescue organization with a small stipend for Tyler. "She'll never be able to resist," Eleanor predicted. "Her entire plan was centered around getting your house. If she thinks it's slipping away for good, she'll make a move." We spread the rumor carefully. I mentioned it at my senior technology class, knowing that several attendees were notorious gossips. Tyler accidentally mentioned it within earshot of one of Chloe's friends at his campus coffee shop. David, who was in on the plan, made sure to act distressed about it during a work call that his coworker, who was friends with Chloe's sister, could overhear. Then, we waited. The first sign came 3 days later, a hang-up call from an unknown number, then another the next day. My home security system recorded a car driving slowly past my house several times, but never close enough to identify. "She's watching," Eleanor observed, "gathering information, looking for weaknesses." 4 days later,
My home security camera, now recording to a secure local hard drive, caught Chloe driving slowly past my house at 1 a.m. The next night, she parked a block away and walked around the perimeter of my property, keeping to the shadows. She was surveilling me, looking for weaknesses. On the third night, we were ready. Eleanor stayed over, sleeping in the guest room. Tyler had installed additional cameras in hidden locations outside. Detective Rivera had been informed of our plan and had plainly told us it was risky, but had agreed to have a patrol car nearby. If she makes a move, Rivera had warned, don't confront her. Call us immediately. At 2:17 a.m., the silent alarm Tyler had installed triggered. Someone was attempting to force the back door. Eleanor and I were instantly awake, moving quietly to our predetermined positions. I called 911 while Eleanor monitored the security feed on a tablet. "She's in," Eleanor whispered, coming through the kitchen. I could hear faint footsteps now. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I relayed information to the 911 dispatcher. This was my home, and I would not be driven from it by fear. The power suddenly cut out. She had found the electrical panel. But Tyler had anticipated this, installing battery backups for the security system and strategic lights. A dim emergency light kicked on in the hallway, casting long shadows. Through the security tablet, we could see Chloe moving through my kitchen. She was dressed in black, wearing gloves, and carrying something in her hand, a cloth bag of some kind. It was like watching a replay of her previous attempt, except this time we had irrefutable video evidence. The sound of sirens in the distance must have startled her. Chloe froze, then quickly finished her task and moved toward the back door. Just as she reached it, bright lights flooded the yard as the police car pulled up. "Police, stop right there!" came a voice from outside.
Chloe hesitated for just a second, then bolted in the opposite direction toward the front of the house. But as she rounded the corner into the living room, she came face to face with Eleanor, who had slipped out of the bedroom through a connecting door. "Going somewhere?" Eleanor asked calmly, blocking her path. Chloe's face contorted with rage. "You stupid old women," she hissed. "You should have just gone quietly to that nursing home." "And you should have picked an easier target," I said, stepping into view behind Eleanor, phone still connected to 911, recording everything. The look of shock on Chloe's face was almost worth everything we'd been through. Almost. When the police burst in moments later, Chloe attempted to claim she was checking on me because she was worried. But the gloves, the bag of tampered medications, and most damningly, her recorded threat made her story fall apart immediately. As Detective Rivera led Chloe away in handcuffs, she turned to give me one last venomous look. "I was trying to help this family," she spat. "David would have been better off without you draining his resources. The only one draining anything was you, and now everyone knows it." After the police left with Chloe and the evidence, Eleanor and I sat in my kitchen as the sun began to rise. We were exhausted, but exhilarated. "You know," Eleanor said, pouring us both a much-needed cup of coffee, "for a couple of vulnerable seniors, we didn't do too badly." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Not bad at all, though I think I've had enough excitement to last me the rest of my retirement." But as I looked around my house, now truly mine again, I wondered if that was entirely true. There was something invigorating about discovering that age hadn't diminished my ability to fight back, to protect what was mine, to outsmart those who thought me an easy mark because of my gray hair. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking that those technology safety classes might need to expand, maybe include a unit on how to recognize when technology is being used against you and what to do about it." Eleanor raised her coffee mug in a toast. "Professor Wilson returns to the classroom." Something like that, I agreed, clinking my mug against hers.
The sun was fully up now, streaming through my windows. There would be statements to give, evidence to review, a trial to face. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. The weeks that followed were busy with legal proceedings. The district attorney charged Chloe with attempted murder, breaking and entering, stalking, and elder abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the tampered medications, which analysis showed contained dangerous levels of sedatives, and her own recorded threats. David was devastated, but resolute. He filed for divorce immediately and cooperated fully with the prosecution, providing evidence of Chloe's financial manipulations and her growing obsession with my property. "I found notes," he told me one evening, his voice hollow. "Detailed plans for what to do with the house after you were out of the picture, floor plans, renovation ideas, even contact information for real estate agents. She'd been planning this for over a year." The media got wind of the story, of course. "Grandmother outsmarts tech-savvy predator," read one headline. "Smart home, smarter senior," declared another. I declined most interview requests, but I did speak to a reporter from the local paper who was doing a series on elder abuse. "What would you say to other seniors facing similar situations?" she asked. "Trust your instincts," I told her. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. And don't be afraid to ask for help, especially from the younger generation. They understand this technology in ways we might not." Tyler's role in exposing Chloe's scheme had given him a new direction for his studies. He began developing security protocols specifically designed for elderly users of smart home technology. "The existing systems assume everyone has the same level of technical knowledge," he explained excitedly. "But they should be designed with different users in mind, especially vulnerable populations." I winced at that word again, vulnerable. But I was beginning to accept that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was simply a reality that needed to be acknowledged and addressed. Eleanor had reconnected with former colleagues from her detective days and was consulting on other cases of technology-facilitated elder abuse. "Your case opened a lot of eyes. There is a growing recognition that these crimes are becoming more sophisticated." As for me, I expanded my technology safety classes to 3 sessions a week. Word had spread, and there was now a waiting list. Many of my students were my age or older, eager to understand the devices their children or grandchildren had installed in their homes. "I never knew my thermostat could be controlled remotely," one woman confided. "My son-in-law set it up. Now I'm wondering what else he can access." I taught them about passwords, about privacy settings, about the importance of understanding what they were agreeing to when they said yes to these technologies. But more than that, I taught them to value their own autonomy, to question when someone suggested they couldn't manage on their own. One afternoon, about 2 months after Chloe's arrest, David came by with a small gift bag. "What's this?" I asked as he handed it to me. "Open it," he said with a small smile. Inside was a simple flip phone, no smart features, no internet connection. He told me he had Tyler help him pick it out. "It's just for calls and texts. No one can track it or hack it." I thought, after everything, you might prefer something simple. I was touched by the gesture, by his understanding that what I wanted most was control over my own environment. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand. "It's perfect." We were healing slowly but surely. David was in therapy, working through the trauma of Chloe's betrayal and his own unwitting role in what had almost happened to me. I was finding a new purpose in helping others avoid similar situations. And my house remained my sanctuary, now free of surveillance and digital manipulation. I kept some modern conveniences, my laptop for email, a basic cell phone, but I'd removed the smart devices, preferring old-fashioned thermostats and appliances that didn't need an internet connection to function.
As summer turned to fall, I sat on my back porch watching the maple leaves change color, sipping tea I'd made myself on a stove that couldn't be remotely activated. Eleanor sat beside me, working on a crossword puzzle. "Trial set for next month," she remarked. "Are you ready to testify?" "More than ready. I've spent my whole life teaching young people. One more lesson won't hurt." Eleanor smiled. "What's the lesson this time, Professor?" I thought for a moment, watching a maple leaf drift slowly to the ground. "That age doesn't determine strength," I said finally, "and that freedom is worth fighting for, at any stage of life." The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across my garden. In the distance, I could hear the sound of Tyler's car pulling into the driveway. He was coming for our weekly dinner, a tradition we'd established after everything that had happened. Life was finding its rhythm again, different, but somehow richer for having been tested. The trial was scheduled for early spring, almost 6 months after that night of Chloe's final attempt. In the intervening months, my life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. My technology safety classes had expanded to 3 sessions a week, with a waiting list. Local news had picked up the story, dubbing me the tech-savvy grandma who fought back. I found the nickname slightly condescending, but understood its appeal as a headline. What began as simple safety tips had evolved into something more comprehensive. Tyler helped me develop a curriculum that covered everything from password security to recognizing digital manipulation. We even added a unit on how to document evidence of technology-based abuse, taught jointly with Eleanor, who brought her detective expertise to the table. "You're a natural teacher," Tyler observed after sitting in on one of my classes. "Those students adore you." It was true that the classes had developed a loyal following. Many students returned week after week, bringing friends and relatives. We'd formed a tight-knit community of seniors determined not to be left behind by technology or victimized because of our age. David had finalized his divorce and was slowly rebuilding his financial life. The bankruptcy had been painful but necessary. Chloe's spending and secret debt had been even more extensive than initially discovered. She had opened credit cards in his name, taken out loans using their home as collateral, and emptied their savings account in the weeks before her arrest. He'd moved to a modest apartment and was attending therapy to process the betrayal and his own unwitting role in what had nearly happened to me. "I keep thinking about how I almost lost you," he said during one of our weekly dinners. "How I was so blind to what was happening right in front of me." "We both were for a while," I reminded him. "She was very good at what she did." That was the hardest part to reconcile, how skillfully Chloe had manipulated all of us. According to the prosecutor, this wasn't her first attempt at such a scam. They had uncovered evidence that she had tried something similar with an elderly uncle of her first husband, though that case had never been reported to authorities. "There's a pattern," Detective Rivera explained during a pretrial meeting. "She targets older individuals with valuable assets and isolates them from family members who might intervene." As the trial date approached, I found myself both dreading and anticipating the confrontation. Testifying meant reliving those frightening months, but it also meant closure, a chance to look Chloe in the eye and show her that she had failed. The day before the trial, Tyler and I sat on my porch swing, enjoying the first warm evening of the season. The maple tree was budding, tiny green promises of another summer to come. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly I'm ready for it to be over." Tyler nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "I've been thinking, what happened to you isn't unique. The methods might be new, but elder abuse through technology is becoming more common. I know. I hear stories in my classes all the time." "Right. So I've been developing an app, a safety system for older adults who use smart home technology. It creates a transparent log of all commands that can be viewed by the user and trusted family members, flags unusual activities,
and requires multi-person authentication for certain changes. I smiled at his enthusiasm. That sounds impressive. It needs work, but the concept is solid. I was hoping, he glanced at me, that you might consider being a consultant on the project. Your experience would be invaluable. I was touched by the offer. Me? A technology consultant? At my age? Especially at your age, Tyler insisted. Who better to help design safety features than someone who's experienced the dangers firsthand? I considered it. 6 months ago, I was fighting to maintain my independence in a house that had become a trap. Now I was being offered a chance to help protect others from similar experiences. I think I'd like that, I said finally. The morning of the trial dawned clear and bright. Eleanor picked me up early and we met with the prosecutor for a final review of our testimony. The courtroom was more crowded than I had expected. Apparently, my case had drawn attention from advocates for elder rights and technology ethics alike. Chloe sat at the defense table, immaculately dressed and composed. She didn't look like someone capable of the calculated cruelty she'd inflicted. That was part of her power, the disconnect between her polished appearance and her predatory nature. When I took the stand, I felt a momentary wave of anxiety. But then I looked around the courtroom and saw my support system. David, his face solemn with regret and resolve, Tyler giving me an encouraging nod, Eleanor watchful and protective as always, and scattered throughout, students from my technology classes, there to show solidarity. I began my testimony, my voice growing stronger with each question answered. I described the gradual isolation, the gaslighting, the manipulation of my environment, and the final night when Chloe had broken in to tamper with my medication. The evidence was presented methodically. The security footage, the tampered medications, the threatening notes, all building an irrefutable case.
During cross-examination, Chloe's lawyer tried to paint me as confused, technologically incompetent, possibly suffering from paranoid tendencies. But I remained calm, correcting his assumptions about my capabilities and understanding. So you expect the jury to believe that a 78-year-old woman with limited technical knowledge was able to uncover this elaborate technological conspiracy? He asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. I looked him directly in the eye. I expect the jury to understand that age doesn't determine capability. I taught myself what I needed to know, with help from people who believed me. That's all any of us can do when faced with challenges. Learn, adapt, and find allies who support us. There was a murmur of approval from the gallery. The lawyer quickly moved on. When it was over and I returned to my seat, Eleanor squeezed my hand. "Perfect," she whispered. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts: attempted poisoning, breaking and entering, technological harassment, and elder abuse. Chloe's face remained impassive as the judge sentenced her to 12 years in prison. As we left the courthouse, a reporter approached me. "Mrs. Wilson, how does it feel to have justice served?" I considered the question. "Justice is important," I said finally. "But what matters more to me is that this case might help others recognize and prevent similar situations. Technology should connect us and make our lives easier, not become a weapon of control." Later that evening, my family and friends gathered at my house for a small celebration. As I looked around at the faces of those who had stood by me, who had believed me when belief was in short supply, I felt profoundly grateful. David raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom, who taught us all that you should never, ever underestimate a grandmother with determination." Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. The nightmare was over, transformed into a story of resilience and reclaimed power. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone on my porch swing, listening to the familiar sounds of my neighborhood. My house was mine again, truly mine. Not a prison or a battlefield, but a home where I felt safe. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. First meeting with potential investors for the safety app tomorrow. They're excited about our senior consultant with field experience. Still on board? I smiled as I typed my reply. Absolutely. Someone needs to make sure these young tech developers understand what real users need. Over the next year, my life developed a new and unexpected rhythm. Tyler's app, which we named Clearview, gained traction with senior living communities and was being tested by several home security companies. I traveled with him to tech conferences where I spoke about my experience and the importance of designing technology with vulnerable populations in mind. My technology safety classes expanded into a full program, adopted by senior centers across the state. I co-authored a book with Eleanor titled Digital Self-Defense for Seniors, which became a surprise bestseller in its niche. David found his footing again. The bankruptcy discharged most of Chloe's accumulated debt, and he moved into a small house not far from mine. Our relationship had deepened through the crisis, evolving into a friendship between equals rather than the sometimes patronizing parent-child dynamic that had developed before. I'm dating again, he told me one Sunday over brunch. Nothing serious, but she's kind. A librarian. Librarians are generally trustworthy people, I observed with a smile. But I expect to meet her soon. Already planning the interrogation? He teased. Just a friendly chat with perhaps a few strategic questions about her views on elder care. We both laughed, the painful past receding further with each shared moment of joy. Even my relationship with technology evolved. I remained cautious, but not fearful. I kept my house deliberately low-tech, preferring manual controls and simple devices. But I embraced technology that genuinely improved my life. My laptop for writing, my basic smartphone for staying connected with family, and the tablet I used for teaching. The story of my narrow escape spread further than I ever expected. I received letters from seniors across the country who had experienced similar situations, though few as dramatic as mine. Some had been financially exploited by family members using electronic access to their accounts. Others had been monitored through safety devices that became tools of control. I answered each letter personally, offering whatever guidance I could and connecting people with resources in their areas. It became a sort of informal support network, seniors helping seniors navigate the sometimes treacherous intersection of aging and technology. One afternoon, about a year after the trial, I received a call from a producer at a national news program. "We're doing a special report on technology-facilitated elder abuse," she explained. "Your case is one of the most compelling examples we found. Would you be willing to be interviewed?" I hesitated. I declined most media requests, preferring to focus on my local work. But maybe a national platform could help others who were suffering in silence. "I'll do it," I agreed, on one condition. The segment can't just be about the dangers. It needs to empower seniors with solutions. The producer readily agreed, and a week later, a film crew arrived at my house. The interview was thoughtful and comprehensive, covering not just what happened with Chloe, but the work I'd been doing since. What would you say to seniors who are intimidated by technology? Learn what you need to know, I replied. You don't have to understand every aspect of how these devices work, but you should understand what they're doing in your home. And never be afraid to ask questions or say no to technology that makes you uncomfortable. And what about family members who might be installing these systems in their elderly relatives' homes? Include them in the process, I said firmly. Explain how things work. Make sure they maintain control over their environment. Technology should enhance independence, not diminish it. The segment aired a month later, generating a fresh wave of interest in the issue. I received more letters, more calls, more requests to speak at senior centers and retirement communities. You've become an activist in your 70s, Eleanor observed with amusement. What's next? Running for office? Hardly, I laughed. Those smart homes, smarter seniors might make a good campaign slogan. On the second anniversary of Chloe's arrest, I visited her in prison. She had declined all of David's attempts to communicate, but she agreed to see me, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps seeking closure of her own. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes replaced by a prison uniform, her once perfect makeup absent, but her eyes still held that calculating gleam. "Why are you here?" she asked me as we sat across from each other in the visiting room. "To understand," I replied honestly, "to see the person who nearly destroyed my family." She leaned back, studying me. "You know, if you had just gone quietly to that nursing home, everyone would have been better off. David would have had financial security, you would have had professional care. And you would have had my house." I finished for her. She shrugged. It was a practical solution. Except that it wasn't what I wanted, and it's my life, not a problem to be solved for someone else's benefit. We talked for nearly an hour. She showed no remorse, no recognition of the pain she had caused. In her mind, she had simply been pragmatic, seeing a valuable asset going unused and trying to acquire it in the most efficient way possible. As I left, she called after me. "You were lucky, you know. Most old people don't have a tech-savvy grandson or a former detective as a friend." I turned back. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. So luck isn't the only thing standing between seniors and people like you. That visit brought me a different kind of closure. I had looked into the face of the person who tried to destroy me and felt not fear, but pity. Chloe would spend years in prison while I was free, surrounded by family and purpose. 6 months ago, I had been afraid of the technology that surrounded me, seeing it as a threat. Now I understood it was just a tool, one that could be misused, yes, but also one that could be harnessed for protection, connection, and empowerment. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 78 years old, and I'm just getting started.